Okay, and welcome back. This is going to be the after action report for our Field of Glory Empire's Rome run. In the last part, we won the game by getting our legacy to be 3 times as much as everyone else's. One thing I didn't notice, or didn't know, because I don't frequently do it, I don't frequently do humiliations, is that when you humiliate someone, you actually steal the legacy from them. Didn't realize that was a thing. So yeah, we stole the legacy from Macedonia. We didn't need it. So if we still didn't get that 1,000, we'd have 2,789 or 28 or 27,893, which would be more than 3 times 9,200. Technically, by taking their 1,000 away, we gained 1,000, so we have 1,000 more than we need to win. But we needed to inflict the 1,000 damage, less so than we needed to gain the 1,000 in reward. In income and legacy, we were getting 455, with most of it coming from regions. So you can see early on, objectives are very, very valuable because you're getting a guaranteed 1 legacy per objective you take. And the structures can also be pretty valuable. They're particularly valuable for the Greeks and Carthage, because both the Greeks and Carthage can get buildings that provide legacy that are built everywhere. Everyone else tends to get them mostly from wonders. And there's a limited number of wonders they can build, so there's a limited number of legacy points they can get. And then from regions also, regions, we can poke into some of the regions. You get legacy from the regions based on how much culture they've gained over the entire game. I believe it's 1,000, 5,000, 15,000, 50,000, and each time you raise a rank, it gets +1 legacy production per turn. So in practice, that means in a short game like this, where you're not playing up to turn 500, usually the best you're going to get is about 3 legacy points per territory. Now if we come in here, we'll get a breakdown. There we go. Breakdown of the balance between all the regions. So we had 19 that managed to get up to 15,000 ratio. You notice we got 0 that made it up to 50,000. 50,000, I think, is something that's reasonable to achieve if you're going out to 500 turns. But for most of the runs that I've done, you don't have, at least, what, that's the best way to say it. You don't have to usually go that far if you're playing against the AI on sort of balanced equal difficulties, because the AI isn't quite that good. So the runs don't go that long, so you tend not to hit the +4 ratio. There may be more after +4. I've never needed to play long enough to get to +4 from territory. But yeah, we had 19 that made it +3. We had 66 that made +2. We had 51 that were making +1. How many territories do we even have? I think that's pretty much. I would not be surprised if like every territory we had at this point at the end here was making some. Yeah, we have 161 territories. So we can do a little bit of quick math here. 161. Oh no, we probably had a decent number that weren't actually making any then. 9 + 6 is 15, plus another 9, so that's 24. 144. Okay, so we had 24 of our regions weren't making any legacy points. But that just gives you an idea of if you play the game long enough, you can get the territories to be worth about a decent number of legacy points in general. But if you wanted to sort of turtle and do it based off of wonders, most of the nations can only get legacy points from wonder buildings. So things like the national wonders, like the Great Mine, the Great Engineering School, and so on. Whereas the World of Wonders, which are things like the Temple of Zeus, the Great Sanctuary, the Stone Quarry, which is, I think, a reference to the Temple of Artemis in Athens. I think it's been reduced to, quote unquote, the Stone Quarry, but it technically is a wonder. There's also a lot of wonders that if you're going the path of the Conqueror, that you can conquer and repair. We didn't get involved with any of them this game. But the Tower of Babel is destroyed. If you build up this region enough, this is a repairable world wonder, and it will obviously provide more legacy than just owning it does if you can repair it. We didn't come out this far, but arguably, if we were to keep going, that's the direction we're going. We're going Egypt, Macedonia, or Egypt, Mesopotamia next. There happens to be the Ishtar Gates here. As you can see, the Hinged Gardens again is in ruin. Again, it's another wonder that if you get there and build with the province enough, you can repair and replace. In which case, you get more legacy. I think the third wonder that's repairable is well, it's a cultural specific one, which is if you're Jewish, you can repair the Solomon Temple. That's a little bit more cultural specific, but if the Jewish control this region, and again can repair and stabilize the region enough, they can repair the Temple of Solomon. As the Romans, our main way of making legacy, which is, you probably can guess, was by conquering territory and then generating a lot of culture in those territories. There were a couple where we were getting a little bit close to maybe getting to up to 3, or getting from 3 to 4. And we had 40,000 here. I wouldn't be surprised if, yeah, Rome's even the Atlantium, which is the territory that Rome is in, was up to 45,000, right? So we were at that rate about 6 turns away from making that a +4, right? So Rome mainly gets their long-term legacy. Yes, they're getting it from wonders, but their main source of legacy, as you can see, is mainly by cultural leveling of regions. You do get a smattering from government, from high-tier government. Usually high-tier government is not worth rushing for. We can see Macedonia is technically making a little bit more than us in this category, but that's unimportant. Objectives, again, you get 1 legacy per objective you take. That early game is your main early game source of legacy. And to some degree, I tend not to spend legacy as a resource, but legacy can be spent as a resource for various objects, or various actions. And usually, if you're doing that, you're probably spending early game, you're spending the legacy you're getting from objectives to spend that resource. Again, I don't tend to use it as a resource, so the early legacy is a little bit less valuable. It's sort of getting the engine going in many cases for me to make culture and wonder legacy. I bring up Wonder Legacy. Wonder Legacy is technically all legacy producing buildings. Some cultures, Rome isn't one of them, but some cultures have buildings that provide legacy that are not wonders. So they can build multiple of them. That kind of combo, well, that can kind of allow them to run a little bit taller, less wide, because they don't need to necessarily benefit from as many territories to generate legacy, to compete with people who are just going wide. If they're those cultures, but also vice versa, they also reward them for going wide because they can build them multiple times. Those cultures tend to be like all the Greek ones get a couple Greek culture buildings that provide culture, or provide culture, but they also provide legacy, I believe. We probably won't see any of Carthage's ones, but Carthage has the Carthage Temple line provides some legacy as well. We did thoroughly wreck Carthage, so I don't think Carthage got around. Doesn't have any in their existing territories, and they're Carthage specific, so if you take them as Rome, they get burnt down. So they won't be in any of our Roman territories, even if we captured them. But yeah, the Carthaginian one of the Carthaginian specialty temples provides some legacy. So the Greeks can get a legacy source, the Carthaginians can get a legacy source. I believe the Jewish culture, in addition to being able to repair the Temple of Solomon, they have a couple buildings that are Jewish only that provide some legacy. That didn't really come into play, obviously, as the Romans, and the Jewish did not obviously get going in this game. Let's see if you can see any of the interesting buildings here. You can see the Dacian fort. This is one of the Dacian special culture buildings. As the Romans, again, we get some interesting abilities. Let's see if I can find one of the Imperial Roman camps. This allows us to build our nation-specific heavy infantry wherever we have one of the camps. He provides a small amount of infrastructure bonus. It also provides a manpower bonus locally. That's probably one of the reasons we're overflowing with manpower. Metal is a little bit of a separate segment. Metal tends to be spent when you're raising troops. So if you're not losing troops, you tend to stockpile metal. But manpower is used to replace losses, both through attrition and to combat. So a lot of nations can actually struggle a little bit with manpower unless they're tribal. Rome, we were kind of having the fun time of the Roman structure here with these imperial camps was providing us a lot of extra manpower. So we basically had no manpower problems after the early game. I think even in the early game we didn't have any real problems. If we play some of the other nations, you'll see what I feel like when I have real problems. You can get into real problems with other nations. But again, manpower again it's a little bit less so the iron, where you only really use it when you're building troops, because you do use it to reinforce units as well. But manpower is something that often, if you get your nation really going and you're not losing battles and your troops aren't really taking attrition, you don't need very much manpower. So we did have this benefit of Imperial Legion camps here providing us a little bit more. The Roman legions did have the ability to build roads. I'm not sure if I have any good demonstrations for that. Oh, we can. So the Roman legions have engineering siege expertise, which allows the infield structure construction level 1. That's a Roman special. That allows you to build Roman camps, upgrade the Roman camps to the limes, and allows you, if you meet the requirements for a given territory, to build the road tier, the road line. The road line goes public works, where we have one here, public works, to regional roads, to paved roads. So that's one of the really strong strengths of Rome, is if you can reasonably hold your territory, is you can really rapidly upgrade some of the very valuable buildings. So then you're not rolling for them. You can say, the Roman Legion, come in, build X, if you have the currency to build it. And you can see sort of the value of public roads here. It's a 0-slot building. It provides 6 infrastructure. It gets even better when you upgrade it to... Let's see if we can find a regional road quickly. It gets even better when you can upgrade it. Doesn't really increase the infrastructure very much when you upgrade it, but you gain +1 trade range. You gain 12% commerce. And trade, the whole trade mechanic in the game is one way to make a lot of money. Especially if you're doing internal trades, right? So you can see this is, we'll click on actually Rome and see the Roman, the network for Atlantium. So Latium here has a paved road. I'm not sure if we got around. Oh, we did manage to get a commercial port in. Commercial port's another trade bonus. So right now, I think we've got a trade range of 8 here, so it can import resources it needs. And the key word there is actually need, right? So if a building needs something, and another territory that is not your war enemy has that resource within trade range, your province can sort of import the resource. It will pay the value of the resource to the importer. If that importer, if the place where you're importing it from is your territory, it pays half the value, but they still receive the full value. And that's one of the ways you can make a lot of money, is if you're basically needing things around, you get the full value on the place that's exporting, and then the importer, if it's from your own territory, then pays half the value, and that net difference is money, basically. So that can be used to make a lot of money. We can see here in the case of Rome, right? Rome actually has pottery. A lot of our territory did need pottery, so Rome's actually making like 56 commerce from pottery. Rome happens to have a supply of wood. 9 other places needed wood, so it's making like 69 income from the wood. It has olive oil, which no one's importing its olive oil, no one's importing its tar. It has a little bit of weapons production. There are a couple buildings that can import weapons, so weapons being imported to it. It happens to also have dye. There's a couple of natural resources here, like Rome had access to coral. But most notably, right, Rome needed resources. It needed stone, it needed flax, it needed copper, it needed salt. So stone, you can see here as an example, right? Stone is able to be imported from Liguria. Liguria is Roman, so it has a trade value of 4. We have a trade. That means that because it's in our territory, we pay 2 to it. If we were to go look at Liguria, we'd see that Liguria was getting a base of 4 for commerce modifiers as income. That then would be multiplied obviously by the number of places that are importing it, and then multiplied by the commerce modifiers, and would be making money from that. Right, so we're making money from the stone. In this case, we're actually not making money from flax necessarily. We are getting it, right? We're paying for it to get it. But in this case, this is actually being imported from Carthage. So Carthage presumably won the trade acumen fight. That's one of the ways you can sort of interact with people. Where if you have more trade acumen than them, your trades will be preferred over their trades, right? So in this case, we're importing flax from Carthage, not because we can't import it from ourselves, but because the trade acumen of Carthage means that that Carthage wins on that contest. So we're importing that from Carthage. We're importing copper. That costs 7. We're paying 4 for it. The receiving place, which is Sardinia, is getting 7 for it. So we make basically net 3. And that is also before the commerce modifiers here, right? So we've got 86 commerce modifier here in Rome. So pots cost 5. So this is 30 plus 1.86 times is where we're getting the 56 figure from. So you can make quite a bit of money by handling the trade game. And obviously that's easier to do if you are a very large, wide nation, because then you're presumably importing from yourself. Because you maybe don't want situations where you're importing from your neighbor. Like, for example, we're importing frankincense from Ptolemaic Egypt, so that's just costing us money. But some of the buildings that involve frankincense are probably worth doing that anyway, let's be fair. Dye is pretty expensive, but in fact, actually, because dye is very expensive, you want to need it around because you'll make a lot of money that way. And then the third thing with trade is if you have a resource in the territory or in one of the neighboring territories, buildings can use it as a bonus resource to apply a bonus. So that's one reason you might want to need things around as well. Say you've got a bonus, or you got a resource, or got a building that you use, say, gold as a bonus. Very commonly, that was like the mint, the coin maker and the mint required or used gold as a bonus resource. Well, if you could need that in with the bank, then you have that bonus, right? So we can see that we are missing a couple bonuses here that we could pick up if we had some way to move the resource into the territory or one of its neighbors. So that's trade. Because we had such a wide-ranging empire, you can see in the case of Rome, there's very few things we're necessarily importing from someone else. Frankincense is a pretty rare resource, so we are importing that from Egypt. I'm somewhat surprised that we're importing flax from Carthage, but Carthage is also a trade country. So Carthage has higher than normal trade acumen, so maybe it is less surprising in that scenario that we're losing out on trade to Carthage. So that would be one reason maybe to want to get rid of Carthage, is so that they can't take our needs, can't export to our needs. So then we'd be making money there instead of sending it to Carthage. You can see sort of the highlighted area. So this is all the places that are highlighted are the places that are within trade range of Rome with the trade range of 8. So you can see trade range is very, very, very valuable. Because it allows you to get access to all these other resources. Civilization tier determines the base trade range. So tier 1 is 2, tier 2, which is where Rome starts, is 3, tier 4, which is where we are here at the end of the game, is 4. And that's the base amount. Onto that you can apply things like roads. So the paved roads was plus 2. Regional roads is +1. The commercial port is +1. I think we have one building. I think we have a wonder somewhere that provides a global +1. I'm not going to spend too long trying to look for it. So yeah, you can see we're making quite a bit from trade. Though it isn't necessarily positive everywhere, because it depends on what the resource has for its resources, right? This is also one reason you don't necessarily want to build everything everywhere. Like papyrus is an incredibly valuable resource, but it's fairly easy to knead papyrus around, move papyrus around via kneading it. So if you make it everywhere, then you can't move it around by kneading it. If you can't move it around by kneading it, you can't regenerate any trade revenue from moving it around. On the other hand, if you put it in specific locations, like you put it every 25 provinces, or 25 territories, so like one every 2 to 3 provinces, right? Then you have the ability to knead it to a lot of other places and make a lot of money that way. So you can see here, this is one of our places where we're making papyrus. It's being kneaded to another 19 territories, meaning just the papyrus here, by taking advantage of the kneading mechanic, is making 171 trade income. Because we're taking the 7 value of the papyrus, multiplying that by 19, multiplying that by 1.5, and we're making 171 money off of a building that otherwise is a farm building. Find the building here. Otherwise, it's just a farm building that produces percentile food. Doesn't even necessarily produce anything else, just percentile food. Granted, in this case, it's making 13 food, but that's only like an okay food building, right? But papyrus, right? Papyrus is, because we haven't been building irrigation canals everywhere, we've been very picky with it. We're getting a ton of currency. This is from a trade standpoint, something becoming an end game, high-level commerce building, just because we've been picky with putting our irrigation canals places. So that's one of the things we've been doing to generate a bunch of revenue, is try to be vaguely picky with what resources we make. You can do something similar. We weren't really leaning into it as much. Can I find a place where we make cows? Well, here's one that imports it, so we can probably find... Oh, you're coming from Lyrica. Okay. Yeah, so cows, you can do sort of the same thing. You can do sort of the same thing with salt. That one's coming from Amelia. So maybe if we look at Amelia, we can see a good example of this. Oh, no, that's Macedonia. Where's Amelia? Amelia is somewhere. Let's see if we can actually find a territory. Using the search function to find what I'm looking for. There we go. So you can see here, granted, we're not making a very good advantage of the cattle, right? But cattle is something you can move around, also via kneading a lot, because the smokehouse needs cattle. So this is a bad example, right? You don't necessarily want your building that needs a resource, unless it's a good building, like academies and stuff like that. You don't necessarily want it where the resource is being produced, because then it can't import the resource, so it doesn't cost that territory anything, but also the territory you import it from doesn't generate any revenue. But you can move cattle around a lot using the smokehouse. You can move salt around a lot using the salt house. One of the other buildings I've been liking a lot, building a lot of, is the land expansion chain. Land expansion chain needs wood, so that moves your wood around a lot. So you do want to be picky where you're building your cow ranches. You want to be picky where you're building your salt producers. You want to be picky where you're generating wood. You don't just want to build those options when they pop up, because you want like one for like every 25 states, so you can get them to be quite valuable. And you can kind of see where that value comes in right here. So this is an example. This isn't a particularly good one, right? This is not like the virus one we had in South Italy. But here we've got a lumber producer. Lumber's worth 4 value. This place is supplying it to 3 other places. So that's 12 value it's receiving. That's getting hit with the commerce multiplier of about 45%. So we're making like 17 for having a sawmill. And 17 is actually like a mid-tier commerce building. That's not something to scoff at, right? But that obviously goes down as you build more and more lumber producers, right? So you don't want to just have lumber everywhere. You want to have 1 or 2 or 3, depending upon the size of your nation, very well-placed lumber producers, so they can be very, very valuable. In fact, we might actually be able to go around and be a little bit more picky with our building placements and increase our revenue that way. So with that, that's sort of the after-action report on trade. You can see we are, in many cases, making money. Most of our places are making money. There's the odd place where it's just a net importer, where it's not making money. But I believe, yeah, as we can kind of see here, you pay the value, or the half the value if you're importing it from yourself. But the amount that you generate from having it needed by someone else is modified by your commerce. So unless you are needing a lot of things in a given place and really not importing anything, it tends to get multiplied pretty well, right? So this is a 12 plus 57%, so we're getting up to 19, right? Like, that's good, right? Don't get me wrong. That's a very, very valuable thing. And to be fair, that's almost offsetting the upkeep cost of importing all of the other stuff, right? So a lot of our stuff is just net producing. Here is another very productive one. I think this is a productive one because it's got papyrus. Yeah. Papyrus is a pretty good one. If you're assuming you're reasonably picky on where you place papyrus, papyrus is pretty valuable. Because it's not necessarily a build everywhere. It only comes from the tier 3 irrigation canal, which I think you can only place in places that are not arid. Not 100% sure on the building requirements. I'd have to check my cheat sheet. So, for example, we can't build it out here in the desert. The desert isn't going to get any papyrus production in it. Though it can still need it, right? So we can use this place like, oh, we know this place isn't going to make papyrus, but it can still want papyrus. And then if it imports that papyrus, now you're making money. Now, granted, I suppose that's the thing where you can be, if you're like playing Egypt. As Egypt, you have a natural papyrus producer. They don't have a canal here. Just the Egyptian Delta happens to have some papyrus in it. So there's some natural resources. In this case, there's a natural source of papyrus. But yeah, so lots of very valuable resources you can push around. Salt's something you can push around a lot. Flax is something you can push around a lot. Lumber is something you can push around a lot. Cattle is something you can push around a lot. Papyrus is, as I brought up, is worth a lot and easy to push around to make money. Tools is something you kind of push around. It's a little bit harder to push around. It is also very valuable, don't get me wrong. Some of the things that are valuable that are harder to push around are things like drugs. Lots of things get bonuses from drugs, but very few things actually move it, which makes it a little bit hard to get it places. Same sort of thing with silver, right? Silver, lots of things get bonuses from it, but it's not really easy to move around, right? It's saying, oh, structures that need this trade get silver mine. So you could in theory say, oh, silver mine can move silver, right? Except silver mine requires the territory to have silver already, so you can't use that to move it around. Basically, the only thing we can use to move this around is jewelry shops. So that's a little bit hard to move around, but also silver is pretty valuable, so you can move it around. If you are building jewelry shops, they do generate a decent amount of revenue if you can import it from your own nation. Glass can only be produced; it can't be moved. There's a couple buildings that, as you can see, the upper levels of the temple line move ceramics. But yeah, so that's sort of the after-action report on trade. Because we have this nice, big, thriving empire, most of our territories are positive from a trade standpoint, where they're mostly making money, and some of them are making phenomenal money. Right, 113 here. This guy's actually coming off with sales. So this is our main sail maker, probably. This place is one of our major papyrus makers, making 211. With most of that coming from the papyrus, right? There's a little bit coming from leather. And again, leather apparently is something you need around pretty easily. Oh, because the armor uses it, of course. And maybe that's the thing to recognize, right? Armor is maybe not a building you necessarily want to build a lot of, unless you are a leather producer and can use it to move your leather around, and now then it becomes pretty valuable to build a lot of them. And so on and so forth. As far as the game went, strategy-wise, obviously as Rome, we started off with 3 territories. We started with Tiberias, Latium, and Campania. I believe you start off with a war, I forget the name of the nation, that starts with Aemilia and Picenum here. That war can be a little bit tricky, because they start off without having Picenum fortified. So if you try to march your army to take Picenum, and they march their army into Picenum, suddenly you're facing both the garrison and their army. And the early Roman army is, don't get me wrong, is pretty good. But it doesn't necessarily reliably win that battle because of how outnumbered you are. Because you're also in the plains, so if you're outnumbered in the plains, that can be a problem. The plains have one of the largest frontages, and in fact, most of the armies we were running around in this game are actually not targeted at fighting in the plains. Right, we've been building armies specifically to fight mostly in the hills. We've been targeting like frontage 8 armies that do really well in the hills, do really well in forests. Granted, they still lose to 4 specialist armies, and we didn't run into any into hill specialist armies, but hill specialist armies would probably defeat them as well. But the Roman Legion is pretty good all-arounder unit. They still don't necessarily do particularly well when outnumbered, and we weren't necessarily building our stacks large enough to not get outnumbered. So early game, you got to be a little bit careful trying to end the war you start with. And I think the way we worked out is we kind of just ignored we were at war for a bit, and we went after the independent territories here. At which point these guys declared on us, so that we fought them a little bit. Then I think these guys declared war on us, and then we went and fought them, finished these wars up, then turned around and finished this guy off. At that point, we'd built up enough. I think we managed to cash the army out of position as well. Finished those guys off, attacked Etruskia, got a quest to acquire the territories south of the river, so we did that. And then we basically filled up to the Alps. Once we were filled up with the Alps, we sort of settled down for a little bit. That was probably the period in the game where we had the 21 turns apiece, where we just were sitting here building up the economy, building up the income, building up the production. In some cases, building up the food. I think that was why we were the era when we were working to build towards the irrigation canal there, and I think there's one up here as well that we were building towards. We did eventually build one in Italia Superior, but I think we also built one. And that's not the one we built in Italia Superior. We built one in Etruskia. I think we built one north in Cisalpine. No, I'm not finding it. Maybe I never got around to actually finish the one in Cisalpine. That would be fine. That might explain why some of these, why the papyrus, the irrigation canal here is pretty valuable. Yeah, this one's doing it to 16, so I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if this is one of the places where I didn't get around to actually building this Cisalpine. But yeah, we were building those in various places to make sure that we had papyrus, because we wanted to build tribunals, or not tribunals, schools, the school line, the academy line. That takes papyrus, and the street poller benefits from papyrus. One of the other buildings I think takes papyrus. Scriptorum needs it. I'm remembering one more, but maybe I'm misremembering. But yeah, papyrus is a pretty big thing you want to import in a lot of places. While we were sitting here sort of building up the economy, not really looking to expand, we had made allies with Macedonia. Macedonia ended up getting into war with their neighbor to the west. So we basically declared our way westward to get to those enemies, to fight those enemies. We had some objectives up here in northern Gaul, the Hyrenius region here in northern Gaul. In the America province. We had a lot of struggle trying to take this place. So this is a forested region. When we were there trying to take it over, it still had its druid hideout. I'm actually surprised this one hasn't lost its druid hideout. But as you can see, the druid hideout has a garrison of 6 palatial guards. And for the Celts, the palatial guards are actually forest specialists. And by that I mean they're heavy infantry that don't take a penalty for being in forests. That is something the Roman Legion doesn't get. The Roman Legion gets penalized in forests. They're still pretty good for forests, right, in comparison to some of the other nations' heavy units. But they do get a penalty in forests. So we were really struggling to take this province or this territory. And in the end, I think we didn't take that territory. You might be wondering how we have that territory if you skipped over a few parts. The answer is we took everything else from that nation and said, hey, we'll give you a lot of your land back if you give us that one territory. And that's how we got that territory. That was many a good legion died in that forest. But eventually we did trade for that territory, and then later we ended up with war with that nation again and finished taking all the stuff we traded back. A breaking point, sort of mid-game, was when we got access to this province down here and gained access to the Balearic Slingers. When it comes to range attack, range units provide a support value to the unit in front of them equal to their range attack divided by 3. So the early skirmishers that Rome has access to have a range attack value of 5. So they only provide 1 support. They're still pretty good at range attackers, don't get me wrong. For the purposes of trying to fatigue or exhaust enemy units. But if you can get up to range attack 6, which is what we were able to get here with the Balearic Slingers, that provides another +1 to the front row of attackers. That helped quite a lot with making our combat units stronger and more effective at destroying enemy units. Up until we then unlocked, Rome sort of has an event-tiered army, right? So they got the initial army that does the early Roman legions. You've got like the Marian legions, which are the mid-tier ones. When you unlock the 3rd tier, you get what we currently have here, which is the Imperial Legion, which is a little bit better than I think the Marian Legion. I wouldn't necessarily have been sneezing for it. It's better, but it's not that much better than the Roman Legion, the Marian Legion. You get the Auxilia, which is like a merge of a light infantry and a medium infantry, where you get sort of the stats of a medium infantry on the skirmishing effect of a light infantry. And then you also get these Sargatii, these archers. And these archers are phenomenal. +9 range attack. Yeah, they're absolutely terrible in actual direct combat. But you have legionnaires, you have auxiliary. These guys shouldn't be getting in direct combat if you've played your units right. But 9 range attack means these guys provide +3 support. So these guys sitting behind a Roman legionnaire, these guys provide 3. The Roman Legion has 6 on the attack, 5 on the defense. So you can just roll into a place and it's like, we got a base of 9. If we've got a good veterancy level, you might be rolling minimums of like 3s or 4s. And you can just really hold your line against some of the higher quality troops. And as you can see, while I'm sort of like, the Roman legions, they're the late Roman legions aren't necessarily that much better than the earlier ones. All the Roman legions have a range attack, right? So one of the sort of strengths of the Roman army is not that they have the best heavy infantry. It's that all their infantry have a ranged attack. So you just get walls of proverbial incoming fire for the enemy. So there was definitely fights where we'd open up the fight just exhausting the entire enemy front line, which is basically -2 to all their rolls across the board. Yeah, that makes a difference. That makes a big difference. So that's where the Roman strength comes in. Is everyone has range attacks. There may be on a mono standpoint don't have the best attack. I think the silver spears that Macedonia was getting were actually better mono melee units. But these guys have range attack, and that meant that at least in the hills of Greece, we were able to hold our own and attrit down the Macedonian forces when we did get to them. But I suppose in the process of getting through our story here of how the game went, that's actually probably jumping ahead. We were discussing how we got into Hispania's interior. I then went ahead and took over Corsica Sardinia in preparation, well, some of Corsica Sardinia in preparation for a war with Carthage. Obviously, Rome and Carthage must fight. We took over Sicily in the island of Sicily. By default, they normally own the eastern side of it. If you're playing Carthage, you probably want to try to bump them off fairly quickly because you want that whole island. In our case, the Carthaginians hadn't actually taken them over yet, so we took over the east side. We took over the north side, of course, like Sardinia, and then when we actually invaded Carthage, we took over what's left of Sicily and Malta, and what's left of Corsica Sardinia, and we did try to land and take quite a bit of Africa. Well, not Africa. We didn't really take much of the African province. But we tried to take on Carthage, and we did manage to sort of cut off the Africa province of Carthage from the rest of Carthage. We pretty much took the coastline over here, as we see here. We took 3 of the 4 here to get the province. We took what they had in Hispania, and we took what they again had of the coastline over here. We didn't maybe push as deep into the desert. We just pushed enough to complete the provinces. We'd come back and take this in the second war. Once we were done with that, we were feeling pretty chuffed about ourselves, and we're thinking, okay, what do we need to win? And then we went after Macedonia, and maybe we made a little bit of hubris. I tried to land here in Mygdonia. At the time, we had an objective at Mygdonia. You'll notice that we don't have an objective there anymore. We didn't manage to take and hold that long enough to keep the objective there. Yeah, we ended up losing the objective there. Though we were able to hold on to the one in Macedonia and get close enough to the one in Macedonia. And yeah, and arguably we lost the fight there because it was the plains. Right, the Silver Spears in the plains, they're like some of the best heavy infantry in the game, and mono against the Romans in open terrain, they were the Roman legions. They were able to beat the Roman legions. But by getting into the hills and forests of western Greece here, that was where the combination of our ranged attack on the legions, the archers, and just the fact that the Roman legions perform better in difficult terrain than the Silver Spears meant we were able to hold our own long enough to attrit the Macedonian forces down. In that war, we weren't able to completely defeat the Macedonians. In fact, arguably, the Macedonians are still alive, right? We can see they still have some Macedonians. But we were able to take Greece from them and basically Macedonia. Greece and Macedonia. Including the Grecian colonies in Western Asia. And then we'd basically just push them out to their Black Sea colonies, Black Sea holdings. They also held the strip here on the eastern side of the Bosphorus. At that point where we were waiting for that treaty to calm down, we popped back over to Africa to take another swing at Carthage. During that swing, we were able to take Africa, the African province of Carthage, off of them. We were able to plump out some of our provinces a little bit more. And honestly, the war for Carthage ended what I would probably say early. I'd offered a peace deal to them. I had like a 6% chance of passing. I'm like, there's no way they're going to accept the 6% peace deal. And the offensive goes on, and we had Carthage down to like this, like 3 or 4 provinces in the west unoccupied. And of course, Carthage then turns around and goes like, you know that 6% peace deal you offered me two turns ago? Yeah, we're going to take that. Okay, so we had a peace deal. We took territory. That's when this place jumped from 3 to 4. Part of that was literally just like asking Carthage, like, Carthage, we want Carthage. You're giving it to us, right? And with the expectation that the answer was going to be no. They agreed. They gave us Carthage. I think the only place in Africa that we didn't already own or didn't take in that war was Sinapele here. This actually was rebels took this over. So a rebellion arose in Carthage. We sent a unit in to deal with the rebellion, put the rebellion back down, and that's why we have it now. That's the only reason we own that one. At that point, we moved 4 of our 5 legion groups back over to Macedonian area to basically attack them for what would be the game-winning war. Less so necessarily because the thought process was either we wanted to humiliate them to drop their legacy. At the time, I didn't know that humiliating them also gave us that legacy. I just assumed I was going to drop their legacy. Or to kill them. Outright kill them so they stop getting legacy so that we could win. In that war, we took this province, or this territory, this territory, this territory, this territory, this territory, this territory. Byzantium had taken this territory from Sarmatia, so we took that from them. This one was independent. I took it because we could. It wasn't really a particularly great one to take. This is a Byzantium territory. And we'd actually occupied everything up here down when we sent the negotiation in. It was going to be a little bit of a difficulty to end Macedonia, because we're going to have to figure out how to get through Paphlagonia here to get into Macedonia and finish Macedonia. So we negotiated their surrender, basically. Where they get their independence, but they get humiliated. That's how we won the game. So that's sort of the story of how the expansion of our empire went. As was kind of brought up in the trade section, while doing that, we did focus on various things that were beneficial for trade. We focused on building up strategic irrigation canals so we could have papyrus for papyrus-consuming buildings. I maybe didn't lean as much into health as I would do as other nations. Other nations, to get the economy going, I tend to build a lot of smokehouses and salt houses, because you can get cows and salt fairly abundantly across the map. If you have access to salt and cows, you can then knead them around to make a bunch of money. We didn't do that as much in this game, partially because a lot of the territories we were taking had a decent number of population already. But if you've got very small, weak provinces, that's a very good way to start them going. Because salt houses provide a decent amount of food for a tier 1 building. They provide a health bonus. And they're providing a decent amount of food for a tier 1 agriculture building. But they're health buildings, so they also provide health. And they provide this need to move resources around. So if you're able to import your own resources to make them work, they can be a way to generate commerce. So they in many ways provide both a food building, a health building, and a very weak money building all at the same time. So that's a noticeable thing that in other runs I'll make use of. Here's Rome, we didn't use it very much. But here's Rome. In a similar sort of vein, we did a lot of that with making use of the Wheelmaker, the Brickworks, and land expansion. Which land expansion needs wood. The Wheelmaker gets a bonus from wood, so you can need wood somewhere to provide the bonus to the Wheelmaker. We were kind of doing the same sort of thing with bricks. It's a little bit harder to get a need for stone, but stone's also pretty abundant. Stone is can get generated by the quarry. You can build a quarry in any of the mountains or hills on the map. And to get the bonus, you only needed to be in an adjacent territory. So we weren't needing it as much, but we were moving around a bunch. I brought up earlier that the Roman legions are they have the Roman special of the Roman legions can build roads. So we were taking advantage of getting the roads built. That means I probably have a greater percentage of places that have paved roads than I would normally have. Though they're a good building to go for, and maybe you shouldn't strive to go for them fairly early on. But that's giving us, if it's only regional, which was probably a little bit more common than the paved ones, it's +1 trade range and +12% commerce. The paved ones are +20% commerce and +2, as you can see here. They also provide some infrastructure. They're also a 0 slot, so they're really good 0 slot. If you're not playing if you're not playing Rome, and one of the road buildings pops up, you should seriously contemplate building them, because they're just good buildings. Of course, the difficulty then is you need to then get the public works is the tier 1, the lowest tier of them. So you can get those to show up anywhere, and they provide +5 infrastructure. To get access to the tier 2 version, you need 2 more infrastructure buildings down. That was one reason why we were focusing a lot on wheel makers and brickworks, so we could get those 2 infrastructure buildings around all the places. As far as the tier 1 infrastructure buildings go, they're probably the best tier 1 infrastructure buildings if you don't need a resource. And by need a resource to be needed somewhere, right? So if you need wood, obviously the wheelmaker and the brickworks doesn't provide wood, doesn't provide lumber. But the woodcutter can basically be built anywhere. The woodcutter produces wood, produces lumber. It's worse than the wheelmaker, assuming the wheelmaker can get lumber. But you can move lumber around quite a bit with the land expansion, which is another tier 2 one. So we were basically doing public works into wheelmaker, brickworks, which gives access to the tier 2 buildings. So we tried to grab the land expansion, which would make the wheelmaker better, allow us to get the public works upgraded to regional roads. And then now we're off to the races. We're getting some pretty nice value. So that was the sort of the building process. One of the things I did screw up early on is I had in my mind that limes were tier 2. So I was probably overbuilding military buildings early on, trying to get to the position where I could upgrade Roman camps into limes. Because much like the roads, the Roman legions can go around building Roman camps and then upgrading those Roman camps to the limes. As a side effect, I was probably getting a little bit ahead of myself. I didn't need to quite do that. Didn't need to do Roman camp, come along, upgrade the limes. On the other hand, limes are pretty expensive. So the big advantage of a lime over the Roman camp is that it's a 0-slot building. So you pay a lot to make the building a 0-slot. One notable thing, however, is the limes is mostly a defensive structure. It provides a decent siege resist, provides a decent amount of walls, provides a decent garrison. Whereas the Roman camp, we do have a couple that I can go look at if I can find them. Oh, there was one. The Roman camp, on the other hand, less of a defensive building, a lot weaker of a defensive building, but provides free supply. Right, so most of the game you were noticing I was probably giving absolutely no care to supply, and that's because we could build these Roman camps. Build these Roman camps, and then suddenly a unit would have adequate supply, because most of our... Find an army. Here's an army. Our army only has a 14 food usage. Right, most of our armies are pretty small, maneuverable, effective armies. A Roman camp would feed, like, most of the food requirements of this army. And it's unlikely they're going to have a province that doesn't make full food. So the army would be supplied, even in places where normally would be out of supply. That was something we were able to take advantage of quite a bit. And then after that, if we were in a scenario where, okay, we got the Roman camps done, Roman camps upgraded, because we moved on and we didn't really need the supplies for that. We had our regional roads. Then it was very often, I'm looking for culture, so we can keep our culture to decadence ratio high. Monument's good for that, and various things. We're definitely going pretty heavily on getting the court system going and getting the academy system going. But then it was also get 6 commerce buildings, so we can then upgrade that regional road to a paved road. That's a little bit harder to do with other nations, because you can't just make 6 commerce buildings and then have a Roman legion walk around and upgrade your road. You'd have to make 6 commerce buildings, have your regional road, which means you had to have at least 2 other infrastructure buildings. And then you have to then roll for paved road. Oh boy. Unlike Rome, where again your legion can come around and build it, everyone else has to roll for it. And paved road is in the commerce section and is a fairly rare building as a side effect. There's a lot of commerce buildings. But it is a really good building. It's over the regional road that it's a competitor. It's 8% more commerce. It's got 1 extra trade range. That's important if you want to be pulling resources in. So that was something we were able to take advantage of as Rome, is we were able to pretty reliably get these paved roads. which means we were pretty reliably able to get the trade range up and expansive. So we were running around with about 6 trade range on all the important territories from very early on. We were a little bit less able and likely to get things like commerce ports up that would provide us extra range that way. But those were potentially in the cards as well. Trying to look around and see if there's any interesting buildings for me to look at. And then you can see that we got buildings like the Trade Center here. This is one of the reasons why this one's making as much money as it is, because we got a plus 10 acumen bonus here. I believe that's a local acumen bonus. And we had a great shipyard here. We didn't really make much use of the great shipyard. We basically already built our fleets by the time we got the great shipyard. We basically didn't lose a fleet battle. Oh, so that's another thing, is the Romans do have a decision to upgrade, well, I say upgrade their capacity to build better ships. If we can find on the Roman fleets. Here we are. And that event is the event that gives you access to Corvus ships, which is the bridge ship, right? So they're basically a ship that basically, when they sail up to another ship, they throw a bridge with like spikes to spike themselves to the other ship, so their infantry on the ship can cross over into the other ship. It was this sort of cool thing that the Romans did to sort of take advantage of the fact that the Romans are really good at land battle, really bad at naval battle, really good at land battle. So why don't you just turn all the naval battles into land battles? And that's what the Romans did. So you get an event related to that to make the get access to the Corvus ships. So once we actually built up a Corvus navy, we never really lost our navy from that point on. So we've got pretty much a like perfect experience navy here as a side effect that we can use to stomp on most navies at this point. This navy pretty much would never lose a naval battle. Would occasionally lose some of the ships, right? We can see the old one. This is our older of our two fleets. Has some of the old ships. It doesn't the event doesn't upgrade the existing ships. It only allows you to build the new Corvus ones, replacing the old ships. So yeah, that's kind of the after-action report of our Rome game. We did make quite a success. And okay, here's the Great Trade Imperium. So this is I think this is the global trade range bonus kicking in. So we can go into national traits and modifiers. So Rome starts as an aristocratic elite. That is maybe something we could have gone and changed. I think that's the one we can change. It's either that or it's the builders that we can change. And the reason I didn't bother to change it is because if it was builders, we didn't want to change it. Let's be fair. Builders is really strong. It gives you an extra building slot. And no question there. That's a really strong ability. For some of the other nations, like the commerce one, if you're playing into it, is pretty strong. The food one allows you to, well, arguably the critique I'd have of the food one is the food one allows you to just do the food thing less, which is less interesting. And then culture is more culture. But yeah, we managed to eventually get up to Empire tier, which is the tier 3 Roman government. One of the mechanics I was screwing up was Rome as a mechanic has a mechanic that if they're any tier 3 government except for Glorious Empire, I was screwing that up, and Glorious Empire was the one that didn't have that effect. But if they're any empire, or if they're any any tier 3 government tier besides Empire, they can at any point the leader changes have a civil war, where any territory less than 75 loyalty can break off in the civil war. If you're Glorious tier, that doesn't happen. Though if you ever leave Glorious tier, you will immediately have a civil war where every territory that doesn't have 75 loyalty will break off. Yeah, so I was, for quite a while, I was being very heavy-handed on trying to keep loyalty above 75. For quite a while, we were in Glorious tier, and I could have just ignored that, and that didn't need to be prioritized as much. I was over-prioritizing it, what was going on. But yeah, that is a mechanic that Rome has, where Rome in particular acts like it is a tier 1 barbarian tribal nation in tier 3 until it is Glorious. where if you have territories that are below 75 loyalty and you have a leader change, that you can have a civil war. Once you're at Glorious, it then becomes, whenever you drop out of Glorious, you'll have a civil war with territories, which is the normal state. Normal state is if you stop being Glorious and you decline. Going into a declining tier will usually trigger a civil war with any territories that have lower than 75 loyalty. Wonder, it doesn't actually say that. It doesn't necessarily say that with going into old tier. But that is the thing that can happen, is going into old tier will often cause a civil war. Technically, I don't think it necessarily causes a civil war if like the majority of your territories are above 75, right? If you just have a few, like if it's obviously a scenario where the civil war wouldn't really be much of a war, I don't think it'll trigger a civil war. But vice versa, right? If you are in a scenario where you're got a lot of territories that are below 75, you'll go into civil war state. And you can see that if you do decline, Old Empire applies a loyalty penalty. So if you decline twice, right, you decline to old, and then, well, I also brought up, in the case of Rome, Rome has that mechanic where if they're any tier 3 government that isn't glorious, then they have a leader change, then they can have a civil war, right? So if you were glorious, became old, didn't have a civil war just by going to old, well, now you have this loyalty penalty. Now more of the places are likely to be below 75. So a leader change might then trigger a civil war, and yeah, that can sneak up on you and break the nation. And then you can see just being old is bad, right? So it's loyalty penalty, infrastructure penalty, manpower penalty, commerce penalty. Ugh. We managed to avoid that. And that was even with decadence to some degree, starting to sneak up on us from old age. And you can see the age penalty there is, with how late we were in the game, we were 206 turns into the game, status age penalty was about a quarter of our decadence, right? So that was actually one of the things that was making it hard to stay progressing. Was up there with nation modifiers and up there with nation size. Structures, we were doing a pretty decent job because we were really going heavy on the courthouses and really going heavy on the academy line of keeping the decadence down from structures. So we hit about a net 1,000 there, but in practice you might have a little bit more there as well. And our culture was a little bit lower for most of the game. We weren't necessarily running quite this high. Last couple of turns we just cranked it up a bit because we didn't need it to be... We didn't need to be running the economy because we knew we were going to win. But yeah, I think with that point I pretty much went over the building situation. Again, there's some nice buildings that when they showed up I picked up a lot. We picked up Scriptorium a lot. We picked up the Academy line when the Academy line showed up. So the Preceptor House is the first one on the Academy line. If we built the Academy line already in a place, or maybe even just a neighboring place, Street Polar is really nice if you can get the neighbor bonus from the Papyrus. Monuments look a little bit bad. It's giving you like, generates cultural time, but with some decadence, and like giving you, decadence is a bad thing. The ratio here is good enough to just build monuments. Monuments show up, build them. The only scenario where you might not build a monument is if it's in like enemy territory, or if it is enemy territory you haven't subjugated the enemy yet, or you're having issues with trying to keep the place from feeling rebellious, right? Because culture is affected by loyalty, so a lot of the negative loyalty things will very heavily tamp down on commerce and culture. So once you've stabilized a region, culture is pretty valuable. And the monument, if you have decent loyalty in a place, is generating enough culture to offset its decadence. But so you build a lot of these. And then we did build up the Academy line and the Courthouse line. As you can see, the Courthouse helps a lot with decadence reduction. This is the Tier 2 version. This is the version where it's actually called the Courthouse. The Tier 1 is the Oration Tribune. The Tier 3 is the Tribunal. Tribunal does everything the Courthouse does, but better. But of course, the Tier 1 is a little bit easier to find. Because you've unlocked a few fewer buildings, right, is maybe a good way to think about it. Oh wait, here's an example of the Tier 3 Academy line. The Tier 3 one is, I think, the first one that provides a decent amount of culture. Oh, and here's the tribunal. So the tribunal is even better decadence reduction. The Oration Tribune, if you have access to marble, I think provides them culture, whereas the rest of the line does not provide culture. So that's one thing to note when you're building up the courthouse line. Whereas the academy line, I think the entire academy line provides some culture. So the academy provides 59. Can I find a school to show quickly? Maybe not. Yeah, I'm not gonna spend too long looking for a school just to show you the school. But yeah, we focus a lot on trying to get the academy line up and the courthouse line, which both, to be fair, provide a decadence reduction. Often, while the noble gardens would be a little bit rare to show up, the noble gardens are also a really good source of culture, especially comboing again with the scriptorium, because the scriptorium provided that percentile culture. So this is 10% culture. So this is saying, oh, it's getting a 37 yield. I think this actually might be the yield here, specifically of this one in this case, but because we're looking at the building, not looking at the modifier. But the modifier is providing 10%, which if you again think you look at the noble gardens, that's upgrading the noble gardens from 100 to 110, which is not, well, in this case, it's upgrading it from 100 to 110. I think we have a lot of other modifiers also that affect our culture. Yeah, so here we've got like 45% modifier from structures, 75 from national modifiers. So we got some pretty large national modifiers kicking in. Obviously, at some point we were collecting the national wonders, so we have all the national wonders that provide effects like 10% faction-wide culture, 5% nation-wide health, extra faction-wide loyalty, some. Surprised we actually the place of resistance is that druid camp that we still have. Surprised that's actually still kicking around, because that's just the despawn after some point. Venerating the Divine, faction-wide loyalty bonus, culture bonus, so on and so forth, right? And these add up. If you get enough nationwide points, they effect start to apply up. We can see our military expertise ratio is really high because at some point I started to focus a lot on trying to build up the army and keep the army pretty abundant. So as a side effect, we are getting a pretty decent military expertise bonus. We're also getting strategy acumen from having 8 military academies. So we got +8 to the leader quality, +8 to the leader force pool. That was one of the benefits of trying to build up the military system. So we had 6 military buildings in places, so we could roll to find the military academy. And apparently the military academy does apply a little bit of culture as well. And yeah, working all of that together, we did end up working into a state where we were winning. Most of the game, once we got everything going, we basically had surplus metal and surplus manpower. Really, the only resource we were struggling with at any point was really money. Partially because the Roman legions, the Roman special ability to go around building roads and building Roman camps and Roman limes and stuff like that, costs money, and that can cost a lot of money if you're doing a lot at a given time. And we could basically, because we had legionnaires and almost every one of the expeditionary armies, means we could be doing, near the end, we could technically be doing as many 7 buildings at a time. Well, 7 different places we were building buildings, and we could be building up to 2 buildings per place, and those then cost money. We could really spend money if we were hunkering down to spend money. So we did end up as a setup to trying to really build up the economy to build money. It looks like we're making a lot of money right now. We kind of put a lot more onto making money near the end. And I think technically we were also, prior to winning the war against Macedonia, we were starting to get some war exhaustion, which was also driving the money down. So usually it wasn't quite this good. 7K is probably when I'd be looking to move away from making money with the workers, with the citizenry, and moving them over to production or food. Whereas earlier game, we were like trying to move people to money, so we had like 2-3K coming in a turn, so we could just be building with legions. One thing sort of after action report that I tend to do is, well, hopefully at this point you've noticed that I tend to, is I try to have it such that I can move all the sort of citizens, the Civ-style citizens, around. So I try to make sure that my territories have enough food to feed themselves, that they have enough infrastructure to at least maintain all the buildings. If I move all the citizens off of building, I tend to like on a countrywide level that we're making enough culture that I don't have to have citizens making culture. I might choose to have citizens make culture, because that is a really powerful ability for them. It's one of the more powerful of them, of the four. But I want to be choosing to do it. I don't have to be forced to do it. Right? I don't like being forced to make food. I don't like being forced to make infrastructure. I don't like being forced to make culture. Same sort of thing. I don't like being forced to make money. So you'll see I'm sort of making my building choices very often on trying to. Yes, I'm striving to get those regional roads going. Yes, I'm striving to get paved roads. Yes, I'm trying to strive to get to the high culture tier buildings so I can be picky with the culture tier buildings. But also I'm building in such a way that I hopefully can reach the point fairly early on where I can put the citizens where I want to put them. Right? If I want to be making stuff, like I want to be building a building, I want to be able to put everyone on building the building. If I want the province to be growing, I want to be able to put everyone on food. If I want the place to be generating culture, I want to be able to put everyone on culture. Or at least put everyone who isn't in the slaves, because the slaves take penalties to commerce and culture, sort of thing. And I very rarely actually want to put them on making money. Right? Money is kind of the last one where it's like, yeah, money is very valuable, and it was very particularly valuable as Rome, because as Rome we have the construction abilities. But a lot of the nations, you're just using the money to do national decisions and regional decisions. So other than being like positive, like 1,000 or something like that, on a national turn standpoint, right? Where for most nations, I'm making 7 times more income net revenue than I'd even want to right now. We'd probably be aiming for like 1,000. So money is a thing. Yes, money is very valuable, and you want to have a good source of it, but you don't really. You want to have a good source of it, but you don't necessarily need all of it, right? So I tend to not put people in money unless I need money, and then we put a lot of people in money is what I tend to do. And again, that's very much I don't want to be forced to have guys on money, so I'll trying to early mid game. I'm trying to build the country up in a way where I'm not forced to do anything. And then once I'm no longer forced to do anything in a territory or a region, I then start to pick the good choices. Right? Then I start to get picky and like, oh, I don't need to pick X to meet my immediate needs. I can now pick the best thing. Or in some cases, be picky enough to go like, yeah, I don't really like any of these choices. Do a reroll. Give me another set. And that's sort of the long term thing there. So with that, I think I've covered everything I want to cover. Gone through everything. If you're watching on YouTube, this will obviously be the last part of the Roman run in Field of Glory Empires. I hope you've been enjoying. If you want to see another one you're watching on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment. Even if it's just a comment saying what you'd like to see. Like, let's say you really want to see Sparta played, or you want to see Macedonia played, or you want to see Persia played. Let me know in the comments. Same thing with Carthage. Lots of different choices, lots of interesting choices. I'm not necessarily going to be the best at all those nations. If we go into, I'll bring up the settings menu. For quite a while, I was in the settings menu as a way to remind myself what bits to edit out. I'll just have to remember this when I'm not editing the last bit off. But you can see here on the settings menu, I basically run the basic AI difficulty. I don't run on easy. I tend to run on balanced. I run where the AI doesn't necessarily have an advantage over me. And you can turn that difficulty up. Note that turn the difficulty up doesn't affect how battles go. It affects their ability to field units, because it affects their economy. Very heavily affects their economy. And it affects what level of culture that you need to stay in the culture decadence ratio tiers. Because it also buffs their culture generation, so they'll have higher culture decadence ratios. But yeah, normally I just play on balanced. As you can see, like you get penalties to the progress tokens and loyalty, the AI gets progressively bigger bonuses. I tend to play where the field's balanced. Is where I feel it tends to be best, which is technically balanced. And in fact, even on balanced here, it's saying, hey, the AI is getting some minor bonuses, which is fine. I can outplay the AI with some minor bonuses. So yeah, I hope you've been enjoying. If you're watching on YouTube and you want to leave some comments, feel free to leave them on the video. Especially if you want to see more. If you want to see more, let me know what you would like to see. If you're watching on Twitch, now is probably a good time to leave any comments if you want to get them responded to live. I think maybe one person might be watching on Twitch at the moment. Otherwise, this video on Twitch will stay up for about 7 days. So if you're watching this on Twitch, but it's not live, which I think some people do, we do get some views after the live video comes down. Feel free to hop over to YouTube if you've got something you want to comment on and leave a comment on the YouTube. It doesn't necessarily need to be the most recent Field of Glories video, because we are recorded. Well, when this was a regularly scheduled stream, which was like 3 days ago, we were 6 days ahead. So at this point, we're probably like 5 days ahead. So if you're watching this on Twitch, there is a decent possibility this portion of this video won't be live yet on YouTube. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, it is live, because otherwise you wouldn't be listening to it. So with that, we're going to go ahead and end this video. So with that, wish you all the best of luck and a good time. Catch you all in the next one, and bye for now.